The 21st Letter of Letters to the Joneses by Timothy Titcomb. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The 21st Letter to Diogenes Jones concerning his disposition to avoid society. I sometimes think that I am the only person who understands and appreciates you, and the fact I take to be flattering to my discrimination, for all the fools believe you to be a fool. There are comparatively few who know that behind your impassive spectacles there are eyes full of kindliness and intelligence, and that your shy manner and reticent mood cover a heart that longs for love and a wealth of conscious intellectual power that would rejoice in recognition. Few care to study you, but everybody wonders why you shun society. Few go toward you, because you go toward nobody. I never should have known you if I had not, by pure force of will, penetrated the armor of cool indifference in which you have encased yourself. I was determined to find you, and I found you. I was not surprised to discover in you the average amount of humanity in its common powers and properties, and more than the average amount of sensitiveness and gentleness. As soon as you saw that I understood you, you surrendered yourself to me gladly, and we held communion with one another, heart to heart. The first cause that operated to make you a solitary man was a sense of your incongruity with the elements of society, or with the elements of such society as was around you. You looked upon the young and saw them absorbed by frivolities that had no charm for you, engaged in pursuits which did not interest you. There was but little animal life in you and no overflow of animal spirits, so you had none of the spirit of play, and you could take no pleasure in the insignificant things with which the spirit of play interested itself. Whenever you were thrown among those of your own years, you entered scenes that had no meaning to you, so that you were always oppressed with the feeling that you were out of place. You knew that your companions interfered with your pleasure, and naturally thought that you interfered with theirs, forgetting that they were thoughtless while you were thoughtful. This consciousness of incongruity could not long be entertained in your sensitive nature without very serious self-questionings. You began to ask yourself why it was that you were an exception to the rule that prevailed around you. And the more you questioned yourself, the more sensitive you became, until there was not a feature of your face, or a part of your frame, or a peculiarity of your speech and personal bearing that was not inquired of concerning the matter. The result was an impulse to hide yourself from observation, and a great reluctance to enter the society to which your life naturally introduced you. Your consciousness that there was something peculiar in your temperament was a hindrance to you. It made you awkward and stiff. While you felt yourself to be the possessor of more brains and more knowledge than most of the young men around you, you despaired of appearing to know anything. You had not the secret of self-possession and confident bearing. Many were your struggles with yourself at first, but at length you became habitually a solitary man. You lost the small measure of confidence which nature originally gave you, lost your familiarity with the forms of social intercourse, almost lost your self-respect. You could not bear to be looked at or spoken to. You retired into yourself and sought in self-communion or in studious pursuits for the satisfaction which your nature craved. I have already suggested the character of that poverty of constitution which has made you what you are. You are not a thoroughly healthy man. Either you are very weak naturally, with no overflow of animal life, or by heavy draughts upon your nervous system you have expended that life. Work or study, or both together, have exhausted your stock of vitality, so that you have only just enough for the necessary uses of life. Until men and women rise to a degree of cultivation which few reach, it is not to be denied that social life is made up of, or is carried on by, the aggregate overflow of the animal life of society. It may be a humiliating consideration, but it is true, that where there is none of the spirit of play, there is no social life that is worth the name. Youth is generally social because it is playful, and as youth goes on to middle life and old age, it generally becomes less social because it becomes less playful. Playfulness is the offspring of animal spirits. There are some men and women who bubble throughout their whole lives with this overflow and are always cheerful and charming companions. There are others who either never have it, or who lose it by expenditure in work or study, and who, as a consequence, become taciturn and unsocial. Lambs in a pasture will run races in delightful groups, and frolic by the hour, but the dams that nurse them and seek all day among the rocks for food manifest no sympathy with them. In the healthy constitution put to healthy work, there seems to be a stock of animal life and spirits sufficient for the individual, and a superabundant amount which is intended for social purposes. You may look the world over, and you will find that all men and all races of men in whom this overflow of animal life is a characteristic are social, and that all men and races of men not characterized by this overflow are unsocial. Overflowing animal spirits form the stream on which the social life of the world floats. If other evidence of the fact were needed than that which lies upon the surface, it might be found in the efforts to produce an artificial overflow at convivial parties. A company of weary men sit down to pass an evening together over a supper. They come together for the simple purpose of enjoying a gay and social time. They know very well that, independent of contents of certain bottles, they have no power of social enjoyment of the kind they seek. They wish to bring back the hilarity of youth, the carelessness of youth, the overflowing joyousness of youth, but this they cannot because their animal life is expended. So they get up the best imitation they can of the departed motive power, and a very sorry one it is. When the artificial stimulant has worked its work, the company is social enough and hilarious enough after a fashion, but the fashion is a disastrous one. It will answer, however, as a proof of the proposition that in overflowing animal spirits is to be found the medium of social intercourse, the menstruum of all social materials. Even when social life starts from a higher source, from an overflow of intellectual life, it is greatly assisted by animal spirits, and those men and women in whom there is an overflow of both animal and intellectual life are socially the most valuable and attractive that the world contains. You must have noticed, even in your limited observation, how much animal spirits will do in making a man, very inconsequential otherwise, socially valuable. You must remember young men and women with ordinary powers of intellect and not more than ordinary personal attractions, who are deemed the life of every party they entered, simply because they had an overflow of animal spirits. If they were awkward, nobody minded it. Least of all did they care for it. They brought society a vessel full of life, and society was grateful for it. You took into this same society, perhaps, a mind well stored with learning and natural gifts superior to any, yet the empty pates amused everybody, and set everybody talking, and furnished the means and medium of social communion, while you sat with your tongue tied or retired in disgust. Now imagine yourself possessed of abounding animal life which distinguishes some of your acquaintances, united with the intellectual power and culture which distinguish yourself, and it will be easy to see that nothing could restrain you from society. The overflowing man must play, and he will always seek somebody to play with. If he does not understand the conventionalities of society and the forms and manners of social intercourse, he will good-naturedly blunder over them. He will be social because he must expend that which is in him in play. I am aware that your case is not like all those which result in self-exclusion from society, but I believe that no case of self-exclusion can be found in any man who possesses a healthy overflow of animal spirits. I find that the disposition to shun society exists very widely among students and studious men. I believe it is the truth that most authors and writers avoid society or feel decidedly disinclined to it. Men who thus confine themselves within doors and exhaust their nervous energy and thought and composition, and with no vigor from the open air, are necessarily without an overflow of animal spirits, and they will find themselves disinclined to society exactly in proportion to their sense of exhaustion. Not unfrequently young women who have been distinguished for their love of society and their adaptiveness to it lose both on becoming mothers of families, and never enter society again as active members. So it seems that just as soon as the animal life sinks below a certain level, the disposition to play naturally ceases, and their motive to enter society dies. And now you ask me for the remedy. You ask me a hard question, and yet I believe that there is an answer to it, though a fresh and overflowing supply of animal life is not to be had for the asking. Undoubtedly something can be done by attending to the conditions of a vigorous animal life. Undoubtedly a life in the open air among men would work a great change in you, but circumstances will not permit this, perhaps, and you seek for the next best course. I have said that overflowing animal spirits form the stream on which the social life of the world floats. To extend the figure, I may say that on this stream some row while others ride, and the relative proportion of rowers and riders does not vary essentially from that which prevails on more material streams. The rowers are in the minority, the riders are in the majority, and if you cannot row, you must be content to ride, for it is essential to your spiritual health that you enjoy the air and sunlight and change which only the passengers upon this stream can win. If you possess no superabundance of animal life, you must be content to breathe the atmosphere furnished by others. You may not be much interested in general society, and society may not be very much interested in you at first, but I am sure that if you enter it and persistently remain in it, you will not fail to discover points of sympathy between yourself and others, from which refreshing and enriching influences will be received by you. Society will take you away from your books and break up your reveries, and that is precisely what is needed. You need to be drawn out from yourself and made to contribute something to the life and wealth of others. If directly entering general society seem too difficult or too distasteful, there are various indirect methods of entering it which are entirely practicable and which need not be disagreeable. Enter some field of charitable effort or public enterprise. Whenever a man undertakes any effort for the good of the public, whether in the broad field of Christian charity or the equally broad field of public improvement, he at once comes into sympathy with a certain number of men and women who give him a cordial welcome. It is only a point of sympathy that is needed to make you feel at home in society. Society may be very attractive to you, though you have but little power to contribute to its life, provided only that you find in it those with whom you have been thrown into sympathy. Think of the effect upon your mind of meeting at the bedside of some sad sufferer, or in some hovel of the poor, a man on the same errand of mercy that took you there. You know that you would feel immediately the formation of a tie of sympathy between yourself and him, would feel that he had reached your heart, that you had found his, and that henceforward you could meet with mutual esteem. Think of the effect of laboring side by side with men and women in any work of Christian reform or public education or literary culture. All work of this character, pursued in the company of others, establishes sympathy between the co-workers, and you have only to engage in it to weave around yourself a net of social attractions that must gradually draw you out from yourself. You must contrive some scheme for meeting society halfway. You are unlike most men who shun society if you do not feel that it does not quite do its duty to you in not coming after you. You retire into yourself. You take no pains to show that you possess the slightest social value. You do not even exhibit that interest in humanity generally, or in the community in which you live, that leads you to efforts on their behalf. Yet somehow you feel that society ought to find you out, and bring you out, and make itself agreeable and valuable to you. You may rest assured that society will never do any such thing. I know that you have no native impulse to social communion, that the spirit of play about which I have talked is gone out of you even if you ever possessed it. But that which most men do by impulse or natural desire, you must do by direct purpose, and as a matter of duty, and you must do this at once. The penalty of failure is the gradual dwarfing of yourself and the sacrifice of all power to influence others. You have a laudable desire to be something and to do something in the world, and know that you have within you the ability necessary to accomplish your purposes, but without social sympathy you will never know what to do or how to do for the world, and the world will find it impossible to understand and receive you. End of the 21st letter. The 22nd letter of Letters to the Joneses by Timothy Titcomb. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The 22nd letter to Saul M. Jones concerning his habit of looking upon the dark side of things. I suppose you imagine that I am about to endeavor to prove to you that there is no dark side to the things of this life, or none worth your attention. You are mistaken. There is a dark side to every man's life, and to the world's life, which I do not think it either possible or desirable to ignore. A dark side that is legitimately a subject of melancholy contemplation. We live in a world of want and disease, of sin and sorrow, of disaster and death. Our souls that think and feel, that fear and hope, that despair and aspire, are associated with bodies, which are subject to debasing appetites, to derangement, to decay, to 1,000 modes of suffering incident to animal being. No mind of ordinary sensibility can look upon, or ought to look upon, the evils which throng the path of humanity without deep sadness. No man of humane instincts can realize, even in an imperfect and faint degree, how the earth seethes with corruption, and moral evil vies with physical disorganization, and decay in the work of darkness and destruction, without emotions of mingled sorrow and horror, emotions that cannot be relieved by the encouraging reflection that the future promises an early dissipation of the cloud that overshadows the world. There are several reasons, however, why neither you nor any person should dwell constantly upon the evil that is in the world. The principal one is that no one can regard it perpetually with anything like a realizing comprehension of that which he contemplates, without morbid depression or absolute insanity. A man's duty to humanity, no less than his duty to himself, demands that he shall not depress his vital tone and weaken his courage by the contemplation of evils for which he is not responsible, and for the cure or relief of which he needs all the strength he possesses or will find it possible to win. I suppose the angels of heaven, with their quick sympathies, might make themselves most unhappy over the woes of the world, and fill their holy dwelling place with lamentations, but I do not believe that they do, or that they ought to. The woes of the world are not put upon one man's shoulders, and though we may feel them keenly, we have no moral right to permit them to affect us further than to make our hearts tender in sympathy and our hands active in ministry. If dwelling upon the woes of others had power in it to do them good, there would be excuse for it, but it is the idlest of all painful indulgences. No one is benefited by it, while your own misery, thus awakened, is added to that which awakes it, and the world is only the more miserable for your misery. Thus your dejection is not only harmful to yourself, but useless to the world. It is gratuitous addition to the aggregate of human woe, and widens the field of misery for other eyes. But these remarks have comparatively little practical application to yourself, or to others prone like yourself to look upon the dark side of things. The men and women are few who are permanently depressed by the habitual contemplation of woes that do not personally concern themselves. I have heard of persons driven hopelessly insane by the contemplation of the destiny of wicked men, and of others whose horror over human condition has plunged them into atheism, or some other dark form of unbelief, but these are rare cases. Almost all cases of permanent dejection and of habitual refuge in shadow are the result of personal trials or of personal peculiarities. Various causes have contributed to make you a dejected man. I think there is a natural lack of hopefulness in your constitution. There are great differences among men in this matter. Some with naturally hopeful spirits live through a hard life and see many bitter days, yet preserve their buoyancy and their hopefulness to the last. Others, with a comparatively easy life and surrounded by pleasant circumstances, will grow sadder and sadder until they sink into the grave. Natural temperament is all-powerful to make some desponding under all circumstances, and others cheerful under any circumstances. Something of your condition is due, I do not doubt, to this native deficiency, though I do not think this deficiency so great as to be the responsible cause of your calamity. Disease is not unfrequently the cause of much of the permanent dejection that afflicts mankind. Hypochondria is not uncommon, and this is a genuine disease that comes under the cognizance and treatment of the physicians as legitimately as rheumatism or any other disease. And there may exist a general depression of the vital energies in consequence of age, or the disease of some of the organs concerned in digestion, whose legitimate result is depression of spirits. I cannot tell how much your condition is attributable to causes of this character, but I do not doubt that disease has its place among the causes. Still, neither natural temperament or disease has worked this work alone. They have done something in furnishing favorable conditions for the operation of other causes, without being very active themselves. I have never been able to find in your lack of hopefulness, or in any disease that has been permanently upon you, the reason for that disposition to look upon the dark side of things which has become the habit of your life. You are probably not aware of this habit. You are probably not aware that you never utter a hearty laugh, that you never confess to a moment of genuine enjoyment, that you are never willing to acknowledge that there is anything encouraging in your life and lot, that you have for years persistently believed your health to be in a failing condition, that you utterly refuse to admit that there is any palliation of your misery in any event that affects you. Your friends are aware that you are in very comfortable circumstances, and not a want is unsupplied, that love surrounds you with its tireless ministries, and that, somehow, life has many charms for you, but you wonder at their perverseness, or attempt in various ways to convince them of their mistake. I have spoken of your dejection as a habit, and I think that it is one which a sufficient power and effort of will can break up. I do not know, indeed, but you have lost this power of will in a measure, but I cannot think that it is entirely gone. You seem to have plenty of reason and a sufficiency of will with relation to other subjects, and if you could have the disposition to apply both to this, you could break up your unhappy habit, I do not doubt. You have a habit of watchfulness against evil, as if you did not intend that Providence should ever catch you napping. You guard yourself equally against joy, as if afraid of being happier than you have any right to be. For many years you have kept a lookout for death, determined not to be taken when off guard. This watchfulness against evil and against joy has been maintained until it has become the habit of your life, and made you a miserable slave. Far be it from me to deny that you have suffered severely by sickness, by early struggles with poverty, and by the loss of those who were near and dear to you. Indeed, the blows of Providence have been neither few nor lightly inflicted, but they have been blows for which a kind Father has provided abundant balm. No shame has befallen you, no dishonor has come to you, nothing has happened to you strange to the lot of the hundreds of cheerful men whom you meet. I do not doubt that these blows bent you as grief always bends, but there was no sufficient reason for their breaking you. They were not the expression of infinite displeasure, and were not intended to fill your life with gloom. Nay, you profess to believe that all these precious lost ones of yours are in heaven, and that soon you shall meet them there. I think you are thoroughly honest in this belief, and that even your griefs cannot be held accountable for your habit of looking upon the dark side of things, and your persistent discontent. I look farther back than grief for the causes of your sadness, and deeper than disease. I believe that the real and responsible cause of your dejection is the religious training of your early life, and the ideas which you now entertain of God and of duty. God has never been to you an infinitely affectionate Father, to whom you have been willing to give yourself up in perfect trust. I do not question the honesty of your reverence for him, or the purity of your worship of him, but your fear of him is of such a nature that you seem always afraid that he will play you some trick, that he will call for you before you are ready, or that he only bears a joy to your lips in order for some disciplinary purpose to dash it away. You do not, like a child, trust him. Give yourself and all your hopes and all your life up to him. You have no ease in him, no peace in him. You are on the constant watch for yourself, seeking to fathom or foresee his designs concerning yourself, and bearing with your poor, weak hands the burden which only he can carry without toil. God the judge, God the ruler, God the providential dispenser, this is your God. But God the everlasting Father, full of all tender pity and compassion, wooing you to his arms, asking you to repose upon his bosom and give up to him all your griefs and trust him for all the future, is a strange God to you. Ah, sir, I am more sorry for you in this great mistake and misfortune than my words can tell. I think you've always felt it was wrong to be cheerful. Your religion has been a joyless one. You received in early life, I cannot doubt, the impression that no person, realizing the brevity of life, the tremendous realities of eternity, the consequences of sin, and the necessity of constant preparation for death and readiness for every affliction, could possibly be cheerful. Naturally reverent and constitutionally timid, this kind of teaching planted itself so deeply in your spirit that a better doctrine, assisted by your own reason, has never uprooted it. To you the most joyful peal of bells comes only with suggestions of the grave, and the touch of a baby's hand upon your cheek reminds you only of its frailty and its doom. The earth has been literally a vale of tears to you, as you have seen the young overflowing with life and joy and dancing along a flowery pathway. You have sighed over them with an ineffable pity. You have never dared to set your affections upon anything for fear that it would be taken away from you, or that in some way it would become a curse to you. You have looked upon life simply as a period of discipline preparatory to a better life, whose joyfulness must necessarily be in the ratio of the joylessness of that which precedes it. Life has appeared to you to be only a preparation for death, and religion has been only something to die by. Now, my friend, I am very much mistaken if it be not one of the special offices of Christianity to release those who, through fear of death, have all their life been subject to bondage, to make the future so clear and attractive that it shall fill the present with joyful content. I know that we are directed to be ready for death when it shall come, but how can a man be readier than when engaged actively in pushing on the great work of the world, and enjoying all the satisfaction that must naturally flow from the consciousness of a future forever secure? If your idea and your policy were to become prevalent in the world would certainly become more thoroughly a vale of tears than it has ever been, more than you imagine it to be. Such prevalence would be universal paralysis. God is not interested exclusively, I imagine, with the small concerns of individuals like yourself. He watches the life of nations and the rise and growth of civilizations. One generation lays the cornerstone of the state, and 100 generations rear the superstructure, and numberless lives are swallowed up in the process. Lives and destinies overlap each other, and one continues what another begins. The thread of silk is not cut off because a single cocoon is exhausted. The single cocoon is not missed, and if it were, there are 100 to take its place. Men do not live to themselves alone. do not live with reference alone to that which in the providence of God may personally befall them. There is a family, there is a posterity, there is a country, there is a world to live for. There are great enterprises to be engaged in which consult no period of suspension short of the national death or the final consummation of all things. What headway do you think would be made in the world's educational and reformatory work by men who, like you, think that there is not much use in undertaking anything because death is so very near? Judge for yourself. Are you an active man in any of the great Christian and humane movements of the time? Do you ever dream of putting your shoulder to the wheel of progress? No, sir. You are the subject of mental and spiritual paralysis. And if the world were made up of such as you, it would come to a dead halt. You have lived in your old house until it is tumbling down about your head, because it has seemed as if anything like a permanent repair of it would tempt Providence to take you away from it altogether. You could tear the old house down and build a new, but life seems so short and death so near that even the suggestion of such an enterprise has appeared impious. You have thought only of him who proposed to pull down his barns and build greater, and of the end that came before the barns were begun. The new garments which you put on are adopted with the sad reflection that you shall probably never live to wear them out, and every chastened pleasure which you put fearfully to your lips is loaded with the thought that you have possibly tasted it for the last time. What kind of Christianity do you think this is to commend to a careless world? There can be no question as to the relative comfort and happiness of the worldling and yourself. The careless worldling, so that he have no vice that burns his conscience, is a happier man than you, and if he be a man of active, benevolent impulses, he is a more useful member of society. This continual thoughtfulness touching yourself, this constant carefulness of yourself, this perpetual watching of events with relation to their bearing upon yourself, cannot fail to make you selfish, or rather, cannot fail to shut out the thought of others and of the great interests of the world at large. I count that man supremely happy who, prepared in his heart for every emergency and every event, has given himself in perfect trust to the great Disposer, and addressed himself with a glad heart to the work and the enjoyment of the present life. Such a man makes no calculation for misfortune, and watches not for death, but does that which his hand finds to do, knowing that if he does not enjoy the fruit of his labor, others will, and content to take the ills of life when they come. Such a man sees woe only to do what he can to alleviate it. There is light in his eye, and there is life in his step. To me he is the pattern Christian of the world. The bright side of things is with him so bright that its radiance quite overpowers the darkness of the other side. He is cheerful because he is free. Is it too late, my friend, for you to be relieved of this load of fear and carefulness and apprehension? I think not. I believe that this habit of your life can be broken, and that many happy days can yet be yours, days of calm joy undarkened by a single care or cloud, days of heavenly hope and trust, and days of earnest, far-reaching work. End of the 22nd letter. The 23rd letter of Letters to the Joneses by Timothy Titcomb. This LibriVox recording is in a public domain. The 23rd letter to John Smith Jones concerning his neighborly duties and his failure to perform them. Next to being a good husband and father, I consider it every man's duty to be a good neighbor. A good neighbor. My heart brims with gratitude as I write the phrase, for memory, by her magic call, summons to their places along the track of the past a line of ministers whose homely and pleasant faces are as familiar as those of my own family, ministers of good to me in 1,000 ways through neighborly kindness. Among this long line of good neighbors, all of whom I remember with grateful delight, There were some in whom the neighborly instinct was as distinct and characteristic and original as the parental instinct or the religious sentiment, and I hereby modestly announce myself as the original discoverer of this original neighborly instinct. Neighborly kindness has hitherto been regarded as the offspring of a benevolent disposition, but such a theory degrades it. It is a distinct growth from a separate seed, and often thrives in people who are not remarkable for general benevolence. When unhindered and thrifty, it is, in some natures, the distinguishing characteristic. Before I come to the treatment of your case, I regard it as a neighborly duty to pay tribute to some of those good neighbors whose deeds are forever embalmed in my heart. To that hearty, loving woman who used to flit backward and forward between her humble house and my childhood's home, lending more than she borrowed and always returning more, bringing in tidbits of her cooking to me, always sharing her luxuries with the hand that cared for me, watching with us all in sickness, and always declaring that she had done nothing at all, and was, on the whole, ashamed of the unworthiness and insignificance of her offices, my tearful thanks. Though for many years she has walked in white upon the heavenly hills, I hope it is not too late to tell her that the man does not forget her pleasant words and kind deeds to the boy, and that the son, though he should live to be old and gray-headed, will always hold in precious remembrance her tender service to his mother. To that old saint whom I used to see stealing across lots to carry food and clothing to needy homes, and entering the back doors of those homes with many apologies for his intrusion, my acknowledgments for his beautiful lesson. To that kind woman who had a large family of boisterous boys, and who not only understood that boys had good appetites, but that they particularly liked to gratify them on the night after the annual Thanksgiving, and found attractions at her house superior to any other in the neighborhood, I assume the privilege of returning the thanks of at least 20 men besides myself. And to him who took a young man's hand in trouble, and giving him his faith and the voice of his encouragement, and sacrificing something and risking much, helped him over the hardest spot of his life into the field of his life's successes, my reverence. Ah, my good neighbors! I did not dream how numerous you were until I undertook to recall you. Throughout all my life you have formed the circle next to that which sits around my heart. I have exchanged my morning greeting with you, have walked to the house of God with you, have met you at your tables, and in my own home have shared with you the work of neighborly charity, and ever since I can remember, some of the constant pleasures of my life have come to me from you. In the days of darkness your gentle rap was at my door, your whispered inquiry was constant, your proffered service was always at hand, and when the little form was carried out to be laid under the flowers, there were fairer flowers upon his bosom that came from you than have ever grown above it since. You are my brothers and my sisters, to whom I feel bound by a tie almost as sweet and precious as that which binds me to those who fill my home. Exactly how this rhapsody will strike you, Mr. John Smith Jones, I cannot tell. I do not think you have looked to see whether you could identify yourself with those of my good neighbors whom I have endeavored to recall. It seems to me that you must be conscious that you are different in most respects from your neighbors. You must be aware that most people are good neighbors among themselves, as most people are affectionate parents. The neighborly instinct is as universal as the parental. Let so much as this at least be said for human nature, that without respect to creed or culture, men and women are in the main good neighbors. I have never yet seen the place where the offices of good neighborhood were lacking. There is not only the neighborly instinct engaged in this thing, but there is a universal personal pride that fills out where the instinct fails. It is generally understood and felt that for one neighbor to help another in trouble, and for one neighbor to make the path of another neighbor pleasant, is forever a fit and good thing. This being recognized, it is felt that a gentleman will do that which is fit and good, and that to fail in neighborly well-doing is to fail to approve one's self as a gentleman. I think I know many supremely selfish men who are always spoken of as good neighbors. They have a sense of that which is fit and good. They feel that no person who pretends to be a gentleman will fail to do that which is fit and good with relation to his neighbors. They feel that neighborhood imposes certain duties upon them which they must perform or lose caste, not only with others, but with themselves. They feel that it is not respectable to be a bad neighbor. I suppose there may be some neighborhoods in the world that have no bad neighbor in them, but nearly always, though the many were right, there is one individual in the wrong. Very few are the neighborhoods in which there is not one person who is a bad neighbor. In your neighborhood, Mr. John Smith Jones, you are that bad neighbor. You are always in a quarrel with somebody about a fence. You are always very much afraid that somebody has encroached upon your line, or is about encroaching upon your line. You keep a miserable dog that worries all the horses that pass your house, and renders it next to impossible for anybody except a courageous man armed with a cane to enter your door. You keep hens that enter the gardens of your neighbors and scratch up seeds and rip open tomatoes, and wallow in flower beds and make a nuisance of themselves from May until November, leaving nobody in their vicinity in quiet possession of his premises. You will not take care of your sidewalk in the winter, and I have thought that you take a malicious satisfaction in hearing your neighbors curse you as they hobble over the ice in front of your house. You will join with your neighbors in no effort for beautifying your street. Your consciousness that you deserve ill at the hands of your neighbors leads you to suppose that they are all banded against you, and shutting yourself into your own castle, you look out upon the little world of neighbors around you in defiance and full of the spirit of mischief. You do not care how much you annoy them. You would feel uncomfortable if you did not annoy them, and though your dog and your hens are a perpetual plague to them, let but a pet rabbit stray into your enclosure, and down comes your musket, and the pet rabbit dies. How far you are to be blamed for this is impossible for me to say. I have no doubt that it is a legitimate apology for you to say that nature did not endow you with the neighborly instinct. There is really something lacking in you in this respect, and so far as this want exists, there is an excuse for you. There is a lack in your nature still further than this. You are not sensitive to feel how everlastingly disgraceful it is to you to be at variance with your neighbors, and to do those things which must necessarily make them dislike you. I suppose that if this letter arrests your attention, you will put in the further plea, or disregarding my apologies for you, put in the exclusive plea, that your neighbors are quarrelsome and interfere with you. Let me say in reply to this that I do not believe the man can be found who is always at variance with his neighbors who is not himself blamable for it. I know men who are accounted good husbands, good parents, and good men, perhaps religious men, who are notorious as uncomfortable neighbors. I know men of irreproachable morals of whom I never heard a neighbor speak a kind word. In such cases the blame attaches to the unloved person always, and if any man who may read these words feels that, as a neighbor, he is not loved, let him take home to himself the conviction that he is the sinner, and that when he shall be reformed, his neighborhood will be reformed. Quarrelsome neighbors are invariably little-minded persons. A really noble mind never quarrels. A really noble man or woman is never complained of as a bad neighbor. I think you are a worse neighbor than you were when you were less prosperous. Poverty not unfrequently makes an excellent neighbor and an excellent neighborhood. When men and women are engaged in a struggle for bread and are obliged to depend upon mutual assistance in sickness and in the various emergencies of life, they are very apt to be good neighbors. When you were poor, you were a tolerable neighbor, notwithstanding your want of the neighborly instinct and other noble qualities. But since you became an independent man, all your show of a neighborly disposition has vanished. The sense of independence has isolated you and given your selfish pride the opportunity to assert and maintain its full sway over your little spirit. Your house is in every sense your castle. It stands as coldly and as lonely in the midst of the neighborhood, and seems as thoroughly barred against neighborly approach as that of Sir Launfal, that alone in the landscape lay like an outpost of winter, dull and gray. Your fences are high, your screens are broad, and behind these you sit and self-complacently make faces at the world. If you borrow of nobody, nobody borrows of you. Nobody goes near you, and you have abundant time to indulge in the selfish contemplation of your independence. After all, is not this a small and miserable life that you are living? Does it satisfy you? I am prepared to hear that it does, but it would gratify me much to know that you are not so utterly selfish as to be contented with it. Are there not times when you long for neighborly sympathy, when the face of a loving and kind neighbor looking in at your door, bent upon some office of goodwill, or even asking a favor, would seem delightful to you? If such times come, then are you not only savable but worth saving. Sooner or later the time must come to every man who is worth saving when he will feel that life has no genuine satisfaction outside of the love and respect of those who are around him. Our only satisfying life is in the hearts of others. You may content yourself with your family, but even for the sake of your family, for the sake of holding the respect of your family, you must sometimes long for the love and respect of your neighbors. No despised and hated man, conscious that he has legitimately earned the dislike in which he is held, can long maintain his self-respect, and when this breaks down, even the worst nature will cry out for help. It must be that there are times when it would be a great relief to you to do a neighbor a favor for the asking. I do not question the sincerity of your belief that you have very bad neighbors. I do not doubt that you honestly consider them the worst and meanest men that ever constituted a neighborhood. I have no doubt that they have shown their worst and meanest side to you, and that, if the man were to be judged exclusively by the aspect which they have presented to you, their pictures would not be flattering. But you should remember that your position and your words and acts have only been calculated to call forth that which is evil in them. They have shown their worst side to you because you have shown only your worst side to them. You have provoked their indifference, their insolence, their petty revenges, their spiteful remarks, their cold rebuffs, and all their unneighborly doings. What there is of evil in them they show to you, because you have been only a bad neighbor to them. Suppose when you first entered your neighborhood you had been a generous, kind-hearted, neighborly man, opening your house and heart to those around you, entering their houses and in every possible way showing good feeling toward them, and doing good through various schemes of improvement. Do you think you would have seen anything of this unpleasant side of which you now complain? If you have common sense, you know that all your neighbors would have shown you nothing but goodwill, and that you would have been loved and honored. Now this good side of your neighbors, which I see and you do not, you must find. You can find it, and though, for various reasons, it may seem to you now that not one of them is amiable, you may learn that there is not one of them who is not more worthy to be loved than you are. How is it that they love and respect one another, while none of them respects and loves you? Why is it that you are selected as the object of their united dislike? Sir, you are the meanest man of the neighborhood, and yet you have times of believing yourself abused and of considering yourself the only decent man among them all. You feel that there is something in you that is lovable, and that something ought to be loved, that something which your wife has found, which your children have found, which your mother found years ago, should, you feel, secure the love and goodwill of your neighbors. Are you the only man of all your neighborhood who has lovable qualities that are hidden? All these men and women you have come to regard as bad neighbors are a good deal more lovable than you are, but they show their unlovely side to you simply because you have shown your unlovely side to them. Show the best part of your nature to them, and you will be astonished to see how quickly they will become lovely to you, through the exhibition of excellences whose existence has been hitherto hidden from you. You have never shown anything but your hateful side to them, and it is very stupid of you to suppose that they will love that. I imagine that this kind of talk will do you very little good, but there are 2 motives which I can present to you that you can measure, and that I am sure will commend themselves to your consideration. With all your meanness, you are proud, and you feel that there is something admirable in manliness. Now, your position as a neighbor is not a manly one, but it is inexpressibly childish. Are you a man, and do you shut yourself within the lines of your possessions and quarrel about fences and lines of boundary and encroachments? Are you a man, and do you rejoice in making yourself offensive to those around you by petty annoyances? Are you a man, and do you stand ready to pounce upon any unlucky child or pet of your neighbor the moment it enters your enclosure? Do you call such things manly? Are you not ashamed of your childishness? The real man is noble. He will himself suffer inconveniences rather than annoy his neighbor. He will suffer wrong rather than betray a small spirit of revenge. He will not permit himself to be degraded by a quarrel that can be avoided by any generous and self-denying act. By acts of justice and generosity he will compel the respect of his neighbors and vindicate his claim to manliness. You have moral vision enough left to see all this, and sensibility, I hope, to feel that a mean neighbor is no man, but only a childish imitation of one. The second motive which I present to you is more selfish even than the first, and for that reason you can appreciate it better. A bad neighbor has no influence. No man can move society in any direction who has lost his hold upon these who are around him. You have isolated yourself, and you reap the consequences in your loss of influence. You are without power upon the world. With all your fancied independence, and with all the power which money gives you, there is not a man who would permit himself to be moved by you. You must become a good neighbor if you would win power over others for any purpose. As it is, you are counted out of every ring, and have no power to call a ring around yourself. I wish I could at least make you and every other man who reads these words feel that an unpleasant neighbor is a nuisance. There is no good reason why the word neighborhood should not be as sweet and suggestive and sacred a word as family. A neighborhood is a congeries of homes, and the home spirit of love and mutual adaptation and mutual help and harmony should prevail in it. Home life itself is incomplete without good neighborhood life, and every man who poisons the latter is the enemy of every home affected by his act. End of the 23rd letter. The 24th letter of Letters to the Joneses by Timothy Titcomb. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The 24th letter to Goodrich Jones, Jr., concerning his disposition to be content with the respectability and wealth which his father has acquired for him. Your father, by a life of integrity and close and skillful application to business, has made for himself a good reputation in the world, and become what the world calls rich. He lives in a good house, moves in good society, commands for his family all the desirable luxuries of dress and equipage, and holds a position which places him upon an equality with the greatest and the best. He began humbly, if I am correctly informed, and has won his eminence by the force of his own life and character. I honor him, I count him worthy of the respect of every man, and I find myself disposed to treat his family with respect on his account, for his sake. This feeling toward his family, which I find springing up spontaneously within myself, seems to be quite universal. The world bows to the family of the venerable Goodrich Jones, bows not to Mrs. Jones particularly as a respectable woman, but to the wife of Goodrich Jones, bows not to his children as young men and women of intelligence and good morals, but as young people who are to be treated with more than ordinary courtesy because they are the children of the rich and respectable Goodrich Jones. This feeling of the world toward Mr. Goodrich Jones's family is very natural. It is a tribute of respect to a worthy old gentleman, and, so far as he is concerned, is one of the natural rewards of his life of industry and integrity. I notice, however, that the family of Mr. Jones have come to look upon these tributes of respect to them on account of Mr. Jones as quite the proper and regular thing, and to feel that they are really worthy of special attention because Mr. Jones commands it for himself. Instead of feeling a little humiliated by the consciousness that they are treated with special politeness, not because they are particularly brilliant, or rich, or well-bred, but because they are the family of a rich and respectable man, they are inclined to feel proud of it. How they manage to be vain of respectability and wealth won for them by somebody beside themselves, I do not know. But I suppose their case is not singular. Indeed, to know that the world is full of such cases, many of which would be ridiculous, were they not pitiful. The thought that you, Goodrich Jones, Jr., are the son of Goodrich Jones, and that you bear his name, seems to form the basis of your estimate of yourself. I have already given the reason why the world treats you respectfully, but the reason need not necessarily be identical with that which leads you to respect yourself. If, owing to some circumstance or agency beyond your control, you were to be suddenly stripped of all your ready money and other resources, and set down in some distant city among strangers, what would be your first impulse? Would you go to work and try to make a place for yourself? Would you be willing to pass for just what you are, to be estimated for just what there is in you of the elements of manhood, or would you endeavor to convince everybody that you were the son of a certain very rich and respectable Goodrich Jones, and try to secure considerations for yourself by such representation? I presume you would pursue the same policy among strangers that you pursue among friends. You have never made an effort to be respected for works or personal merits of your own. You push yourself forward everywhere as the son of Goodrich Jones, indeed as Goodrich Jones, Jr. You have not only been content to live in the shadow of your father's name, but you have been apparently anxious to invite public attention to the fact that you do. You have not only been content to live upon money which your father has made, but you seem delighted to have it understood that you can draw upon him for all you want. You seem to have no ambition to make either reputation or money for yourself. On the contrary, I think you would look upon it as disgraceful for you to engage in business for the purpose of winning wealth by labor. Now you permit one who has bowed to you frequently for your father's sake to talk very plainly to you for your own. Let me assure you, in the first place, that all this respect which the world shows to you is unsubstantial and unreliable. The man who treats you with respect because your father is rich would cease to treat you with respect if you were to become poor. The man who bows to you because your father occupies a high social position would pass you without recognition were your father, for any reason, to lose that position. Let me assure you that the world does not care for you any further than you are the partaker of the money and respectability which have been achieved by your father. Nay, I will go further and say that, side by side with the deference which it shows for you on your father's account, it cherishes contempt for one who is willing to receive his position at second hand. You cannot complain of this, for you place your claims for social consideration entirely on your father's position. The Negro slave is proud of the superior wealth of his master, and among his fellow slaves assumes a superior position in consequence of wealth which is not his own. He belongs to a splendid establishment, and in his own eyes wins importance from the association. When his master fails, the slave sinks. No, sir, there is nothing reliable in this consideration of the world for you. You are only treated as a representative of the wealth and respectability of another man, and if he were to become displeased with you, and were to disown and disinherit you, you would find yourself without a friend in the world. In the second place, your position is an unmanly one. None but a mean man can be willing to hold his position at second hand. I count him fortunate who was born to pleasant and good social relations, and all the advantages which they bring him for the development of his personal character. But I count him most unfortunate who, born to such relations, is willing to hold them as a birthright alone. A man who is willing to keep a place in society which his father has given him through his father's continued influence is necessarily mean-spirited and contemptible. Every young man of a manly spirit who finds himself in good society through the influence of others will prove his right to the place, and hold the place by his own merits. No man of your age can consent to hold his social position solely through the influence of his father without convicting himself either of imbecility or meanness. If you had a genuine self-respect, you would feel that you owe to others what you are capable of winning for yourself, and to be considered only as a portion of a rich and respectable man's belongings is a disgrace to your manhood. I suppose the thought has never occurred to you that you owe something to your father for what he has done for you. He gave you position. His name shielded you through all your childhood and youth from many of the dangers and disadvantages which other young men are forced to encounter. He gave you great vantage ground in the work of life, and you owe it to him to improve it. If your name helps you, you ought to do something for your name. If your father honors you, you ought to honor him, and to do as much for his name as he has done for yours. You have no moral right to disgrace one who has done so much for you, for his reputation is partly in your keeping. It would be an everlasting disgrace to him to bring up a boy who relied solely upon his father for respectability. It would be a blot upon his reputation to have a son so mean as to be content with a name and fortune at second hand. I tell you, sir, that you must change your plan and course of life, or people will talk more and more of your unworthiness to stand in your father's shoes, and express their wonder more and more that so sensible and industrious a father could train a son so inefficiently as he has trained you. When this good father of yours shall die, you will be thrown more upon yourself. You will have money, I presume, and you will still sit in the comfortable shadow of your father's name. But the world changes, and strangers will estimate you at your true value, and those who knew your father will only talk of the sad contrast between his character and your own. I suppose you are not above the desire for the good will of the world. Well, the world is made up of workers. The great masses of men, and your father is among the number, are obliged to depend upon their own labor and their own force and excellence of character for wealth and position. People do not envy him, because he won all that he possesses by his own skill and industry. He is universally admired and esteemed, and you are enjoying some of the fruits of his admiration and esteem in the politeness of the world toward yourself. But this will not always last. You must mingle in the world's work, and cast in your lot with your fellows, contributing your share of labor, and taking what comes of it in pelf and position, or else you will be voted out of the pale of popular sympathy. The world does not love drones, and you must cease to be a drone, or it will never love you. I suppose it is hard for you to realize that you are not the object of envy among men, but I wish you could for once feel the contempt which your parasitic position excites even among men whom you deem beneath your notice. There are many young men who have been compelled to labor all their lives for bread, and would shrink from exchanging places with you as from a loathsome disgrace. They would not take your idle habits, your foppish tastes, your childish spirit, your reputation for all your father's money. And these men, strange as it may seem to your mean spirit, are more respected and better loved by the world than yourself. I say that you are not above the desire for the good will of the world, but if you would get it, you must be a man. You must show that you have a man's spirit, and that you are willing to do a man's work. No idle man ever yet lived upon the wealth won for him by others, and at the same time enjoyed the love of the world. All this you will find out by and by without my telling you, but then it may be too late for remedy. You are now young, but if you live, you will come at length to realize that instead of being envied, you are despised. You will make a sadder discovery, too, than this. You will discover that you have as little basis for self-respect as for popular regard. Years cannot fail to reveal to you some things which youth hides from you. You will find that the world is busy, and that you have no one to spend your time with, and that the men who have power and public consideration are men who have something to do besides killing time and spending money. You will find that you are without sympathy and companionship among the best people, and when you ascertain the reason, for it will be so obvious that you will not fail to see it, you will learn that you are not worthy of their sympathy and companionship. In short, you will learn to despise yourself. I have already spoken to you of the debt which you owe to your father for what he has done for you. There are some further considerations relating to your family which I wish to offer. A family name and reputation are things of life and growth. The character which your father has made is a product of life, so grand and far-spreading that his family sits beneath and is sheltered by it. It is the law of all vital products that they shall grow, or hold their ground against encroachment by what they feed upon. Food must be constant, or death is sure to come soon or late. The character of your family, its power, position, and high relations, is the product of your father's vital force, working in various ways. Not many years hence, that force must stop its work. Your father will die, and unless you take up his work and do it, this family character will pine and dwindle and ultimately sink in utter decay. Look around you and see how some of the rich and influential old families have died out because there was no man in them to keep them alive. The founder of the family did what he could, raised his family to the highest social position, gave them wealth, bequeathed to them a good name, and died. The sons who followed were not worthy of him. They were not men. They were babies who were willing to live upon their family name, and who did live upon it until they consumed it. It is sad to see a family name fade out as it often does through the failure of its men to feed it with the blood of a worthy life, and yours will fade out in a single generation if you do not immediately prepare yourself to take up your father's work and carry it on. It is always pleasant and inspiring to see young men who expect to inherit money entering with energy upon the work of life as if they had their fortunes to make. It proves that they are men, and proves that they are preparing to handle usefully the money that has come into their hands. It proves that they intend to win respect for themselves and to lay at least the foundation of their own fortunes. When I see such men, I feel that the name of their families is safe in their keeping, and that, for at least one generation, those families cannot sink. The desire to be somebody besides somebody's son shows a manly disposition which the world at once recognizes and to which it freely opens its heart. I am aware that a young man in your position has great temptations and labors under great disadvantages. We are in the habit of regarding a poor young man who is neither family name nor influence as laboring under disadvantages, and in some aspects of his case we regard him rightly. but he has certainly the advantage of the stimulus which obstacles to be overcome afford. The poor man sees that he must make his own fortune, or that his fortune will not be made at all, and the obstacles that lie before him only stimulate him to labor with a greater efficiency. When I see a poor young man bravely accepting his lot and patiently and heroically applying himself to the work of building a fortune and achieving a position, I am moved to thank God for his poverty, for I know that in that poverty he will ultimately discover the secret of his best successes. Your disadvantage is that position and wealth have already been won for you. It is not necessary for you to labor to get bread and clothing and a comfortable home. These have already been won for you by other hands. I do not deny that this condition of things is naturally enervating. I confess that it takes much good sense and an unusual degree of manliness to resist the temptations to idleness which it brings. But you must resist them or suffer the saddest consequences. You must labor in a steady, manly way to make your own place in the world, as a fitting preparation for the husbandry and enjoyment of the wealth which will some day be yours. If you have not those considerations in your favor which stimulate the poor man to exertion, then you must adopt those which I have tried to present to you. You must remember that to be content with a position received at second hand, and to live simply to spend the money earned by others, is most unmanly. You must remember that you owe it to your father and to your family name and fame to keep your family in the position of consideration and influence in which he has placed it, and that it is certain to recede from that position unless you do. You must remember that only by work can you win the goodwill of the world around you, or win and retain respect for yourself. If the disadvantages of your position are great, your reward for worthy work is also great. The world always recognizes the strength of the temptations which attach to the position of a rich young man, and awards to him a peculiar honor for that spirit which refuses to be respected for anything but his own manliness. I know of no young men who hold the goodwill of the public more thoroughly than those who set aside all the temptations to indolence and indulgence which attend wealth, and put themselves heartily to the work of deserving the social position to which they are born, and of earning the bread which a father's wealth has already secured. You have but to will and to work, and this beautiful reward will be yours. End of the 24th letter. End of Letters to the Joneses by Timothy Titcomb. Recording by Keith Salis.